Hey, everybody, and welcome to the deep dive. You guys are the reason we do these deep dives, so we're really excited to be tackling this one today because it seems like there's been a lot of buzz online around some pretty fascinating, pretty unusual historical theories.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely something a little different.
Yeah, and it all started with this digital document, actually. It's called, get this, Valentia Straiton Celestial Ship of the North .pdf. I mean, how could we resist diving into that?
I know the title alone is like, whoa.
All right, so we dug into it, and let me tell you, Valentia Straiton, whoever they are, they seem to blend some pretty, standard historical analysis with some pretty wild interpretations, especially when it comes to the idea of, ancient astronauts and their supposed influence on, early civilizations.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a theme that runs through the whole thing.
For sure. So I guess to kick things off, let's talk about something that comes up, a LOT in the document, these celestial ships. What are we talking about here? I mean, are we talking literal spaceships zipping around in ancient times?
Well, that's the thing. The document doesn't really give us a clear definition, which makes it even more intriguing, right? Straiton uses the term celestial ships over and over,
Yeah.
but they never actually say, okay, this is what I mean by that.
So it could be like an actual spacecraft or maybe some kind of crazy advanced tech that we just don't understand yet, or even, I don't know, something totally symbolic, metaphorical even.
Exactly. There's a lot of room for interpretation, which, I kind of like. Makes you think, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Although there is this one passage really jumped out at me where they describe a canis octoparts and purses, getting them perceive sex. It's always quite dull known in person. We're like, be if done as I hurt. Could this be I don't know, an actual landing? Picture it, a celestial ship, whatever that is, touching down back in the day.
It's definitely a possibility. And it's really interesting, the whole idea of beings descending from the sky. It's not just a Straiton thing, right? You think about all these ancient myths and those old depictions from cultures all over the world. I mean, you've got sky chariots, gods coming down from the heavens. It's everywhere. It makes you wonder, are these just stories? Or could there be some truth to them? Maybe our ancestors really did see something incredible, but just couldn't explain it, with the language and the understanding they had.
Yeah, I get that. So maybe not aliens in flying saucers with lasers and stuff, but something coming from the sky interacting with humans. That's a pretty wild thought.
It is. And that leads us to the big question, right? The ancient astronauts themselves.
Right. Straiton mentions these beings from the north interacting with humans. Is that where the whole extraterrestrial theory comes in?
It seems that way. There's this line that says, Mia Sumper, Upoi Soa percent, 2%, Upio percent, 2% 4, 2%, 2 first 1%, 2%. I mean, if you take it literally, it sounds a lot like they're talking about contact with, something or someone more advanced.
Advanced beings, that definitely has that kind of alien ring to it, doesn't it?
It does.
But before we get too carried away, we got to remember to be, critical about all this, right?
Absolutely. I mean, anytime you're looking at historical sources, especially something as, as out there as this, you got to be critical. You got to ask yourself, who is this Valentia Straiton anyway? What's their background? Why did they even write this? And then there's the whole historical context, right? What was going on when this was written? It all matters.
Good point. We can't just accept everything we read, no matter how exciting it might seem. But then there's this whole idea of these beings from the north, these celestial teachers, sharing advanced knowledge with humans, right? Straiton even mentions some specific examples, things like Bear 557 factor 5 1967 no that 9767 507 I mean, come on, it's like a sci-fi movie plot.
I know, right? It makes you wonder, did some civilizations really make these huge leaps in technology or knowledge that just can't be explained by what we know?
That's the question, isn't it? It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you question everything.
Okay, so we've got these celestial ships, these possible ancient astronauts, and this idea of them sharing advanced knowledge. A lot to unpack here. And I think before we go any further, maybe we should really define what we're talking about. When we say ancient astronauts, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, that's important. I mean, we're throwing this term around, but what are we really talking about? So the ancient astronaut theory, basically, it's the idea that, extraterrestrial beings, aliens, whatever you want to call them, visited Earth way back in the day, interacted with early humans, and maybe even influenced the development of civilizations.
So not just a quick flyby, but actual interaction, maybe even messing with human affairs. That's a pretty big claim.
It is. And to back that up, you'd need some serious evidence. Like, imagine finding an artifact, something that clearly shows technology way beyond anything ancient civilizations should have had. Something that just couldn't be explained by, human ingenuity at the time.
Like a working spaceship buried under the pyramids or something. I mean, that would be hard to ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe even a written record, like an actual historical document, clear and unambiguous, talking about contact with extraterrestrials. And not just from one source either, but multiple independent sources, all saying the same thing. That would be something.
Yeah, so not just some guy claiming he met aliens, but actual historical documentation, stuff that holds up under scrutiny. That makes sense. But even if we don't find, like, that smoking gun, are there other ways to approach this whole ancient astronaut thing? Maybe looking at it through a different lens, so to speak.
Definitely. And actually, one thing that's interesting about Straiton's document is this focus on what they call cyclical history. It's this idea that civilizations rise and fall, like in predictable patterns.
So like history repeating itself, but on a massive scale, like whole civilizations going through these boom and bust periods.
Exactly. And Straiton suggests that these cycles, they might be connected to, these supposed visits from these celestial beings influencing key moments in human history. It's a really interesting idea, and it's something that historians and philosophers have been kicking around for centuries, actually.
So instead of looking for like direct evidence of aliens, we could look for patterns in history itself, these recurring events or trends that might point to, I don't know, some kind of external influence.
It's a good way to think about it. It's like trying to find those subtle fingerprints of history, the marks left behind by forces we might not fully grasp.
I like the fingerprints of history. And you know what? The idea of cyclical history, it's not even new, right? Ancient cultures were talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the ancient Greeks, they had this idea of the great year, a cycle of cosmic events that they believed influenced human affairs. And then you've got the Hindu concept of yugas, these vast epochs of time, each representing a different stage in a cosmic cycle. Fascinating stuff.
So this idea that history isn't just a straight line, but more like a spiral, with these repeating patterns and themes, it's been around for a long, long time, makes you wonder if those ancient thinkers were onto something, picking up on something, some bigger force at play.
It's definitely possible. And even if we completely forget about the ancient astronaut theory for a minute, this whole idea of cyclical history, it's worth thinking about. Are there patterns in human civilization? These periods of amazing advancements followed by, decline and stagnation. Could there be something beyond our control driving those swings?
Yeah, I can see that. Think about the rise and fall of empires, right? Those bursts of art and science, then periods of darkness and, well, just nothing much happening. It's almost like humanity goes through these phases, these collective ups and downs in creativity and progress.
Exactly. And while, of course, there are historical and social and environmental factors that play a role, the cyclical history model says there might be something deeper happening, some force influencing these broader patterns.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot to process. But I gotta admit, it's a really interesting way to think about history, like zooming out and seeing these larger waves, these cycles that take centuries, maybe even millennia to play out.
Right. It challenges us to think beyond just the linear progression of time.
Totally. Okay, so we've got this document suggesting ancient astronauts, this advanced knowledge being passed down, and now this cyclical history thing, all potentially linked. It's like we're putting together a puzzle, but we're missing some pieces.
I like that analogy. And I think as we go deeper into Valentia Straiton's Celestial Ship of the North, it's important to remember that we're looking at, well, a pretty unique, pretty unconventional perspective on history.
Yeah, this isn't your typical history book. It's definitely pushing us to think outside the box, that's for sure.
It definitely is, but that's what makes it so fascinating. Right?
Totally. It's all about exploring and questioning and being open to new ideas, even if they sound a little crazy at first.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, I'm ready to keep going. What else did we uncover in this wild document?
Well, we've been talking about, ancient astronauts and all the evidence, or at least what Straiton presents as evidence in this document. And it's definitely a really interesting, thought-provoking concept.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it also makes you think, like, okay, what would it actually take? What would be convincing evidence to prove something like this? I mean, we're talking about rewriting history as we know it.
That's a good question. I mean, we've talked about myths and carvings and things like that, but is that really enough to just toss out everything we thought we knew? Like, what would make us say, okay, yep, ancient astronauts were real, case closed?
Well, it would have to be pretty undeniable, right? It would need to be something that meets like the highest scientific standards. You need hard proof. Like, imagine finding some artifact, something that clearly shows technology that was just way beyond the capabilities of ancient civilizations, something that couldn't possibly be explained by human ingenuity at the time.
Like, I don't know, finding a working spaceship buried under the pyramids.
Exactly, something like that. Or maybe a written record, but not just some vague story or inscription. I'm talking about a clear, unambiguous account of contact with extraterrestrial beings. And not just from one source either. You'd need multiple independent sources all saying the same thing.
So not just one person claiming they had a close encounter, but like actual historical documentation that's been verified and, really stands up to scrutiny. It makes sense.
Right. It would have to be pretty ironclad. But even if we never find that, like that one piece of irrefutable evidence, the smoking gun, are there other ways to think about this whole ancient astronaut idea? Maybe approach it from a different angle.
Okay, I like that. Thinking outside the box a bit, what do you have in mind?
Well, one thing that really stands out in Straiton's document is this focus on what they call cyclical history.
See, look, history. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's this idea that you know how civilizations rise and fall.
Yeah.
Well, Straiton's saying that happens in like predictable patterns.
So like history repeating itself, but on a massive scale, like with entire civilizations going through these boom and bust periods.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Straiton suggests that these cycles, they might actually be connected to these supposed visits from these celestial beings. Like they're influencing these pivotal moments in human history.
Okay, hold on. So you're saying that maybe these ancient astronauts, they're somehow behind these big historical ups and downs, like they're nudging civilizations one way or the other.
That's what Straiton seems to be suggesting. And it's actually a really fascinating concept, this idea of cyclical history. It's been around for a long time. Historians and philosophers have been debating it for centuries.
So it's not just some fringe theory that Straiton came up with.
Oh, no, not at all. It's a legitimate idea that's been explored by some pretty serious thinkers throughout history.
Okay, that makes sense. But how would we even know if it's true? Like, how do we test this whole cyclical history thing?
Well, instead of looking for direct evidence of aliens, like spaceships and stuff, we could maybe look for patterns in history itself. Like, are there these recurring events or trends that could point to, some kind of external influence?
It's like we're searching for clues, trying to find those subtle fingerprints of history that might point to something bigger, something we don't fully understand.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the concept of cyclical history. It's been around for a long time. Think about the ancient Greeks, for example. They had this idea of the great year, this massive cycle of cosmic events that they believed influenced human affairs. And then you have the Hindu concept of yugas, these vast epochs of time, each representing a different stage in this grand cyclical cosmic order. It's all really fascinating stuff.
So this idea that history isn't just a straight line, but more like a spiral with these repeating patterns and themes, it's not new at all.
Nope, not at all. And it makes you wonder, were these ancient cultures onto something? Were they picking up on these larger forces at play, even if they didn't have the language or scientific understanding to fully explain it?
It's a mind-blowing thought, for sure.
It really is. And, even if we put aside the whole ancient astronaut theory for a minute, this concept of cyclical history, it's worth thinking about on its own. Like, are there really patterns in human civilization? These periods of incredible advancement followed by decline and, just stagnation. Could there be something beyond our control, something driving those swings?
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's pretty hard to ignore.
Right. And think about it. The rise and fall of empires, those amazing bursts of creativity in art and science, followed by periods of, well, just darkness and nothing really happening. It's almost like humanity goes through these phases, these collective ups and downs.
We definitely see those patterns throughout history.
Exactly. And while there are, of course, historical and social and environmental factors that contribute to these cycles, the cyclical history model suggests there might be something deeper at play, some force influencing these broader patterns.
That's heavy stuff. But I gotta say, it's a super intriguing way to look at history. Like, it's almost like we're stepping back, zooming out, and seeing these bigger waves, these grand cycles that play out over centuries, even millennia.
It is. It challenges us to think beyond just this linear progression of time.
For sure. And, if Straiton is right, those patterns, they might be connected to, well, maybe these ancient astronauts. Like, they're somehow influencing the rise and fall of civilizations, or even, giving humanity a little nudge towards certain advancements.
It's a bold claim, for sure. But even if we approach it with, a healthy dose of skepticism, the concept of cyclical history itself, it's fascinating. It really makes you think about the forces that shape our world and ultimately our destiny.
All right, so we've got this document, right? It's talking about ancient astronauts, advanced knowledge being shared, and now this whole cyclical history thing, all possibly linked together.
It's like we're trying to piece together this puzzle with some missing pieces and see if we can make sense of the bigger picture.
Exactly. And it's important to remember as we keep going with this, we're dealing with a pretty unique, pretty unconventional perspective on history.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't your typical history book.
Not at all. It's full of bold claims and connections that you wouldn't normally think of, but that's what makes it so exciting, right?
It's a true adventure.
Totally. It's all about being open to new ideas, even if they seem a little crazy at first. Who knows what we'll discover?
That's the spirit. I love it.
All right, let's keep diving in. What other fascinating insights did we find in Straiton's work?
Oh, this has been quite the deep dive. I mean, Valentia Straiton, Celestial Ship of the North. This document is just packed with, wild ideas. Celestial ships, ancient astronauts, that whole cyclical history concept.
hmm
As we wrap things up here, what are some of the things that, I don't know, really stood out to you? Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, Straighton's work, it's definitely out there, but it makes you think. It challenges, everything we think we know about the past and what shaped human civilization. And I think one of the most interesting things for me is how Straiton focuses on connections, patterns.
Yeah, I see that. It's like they're trying to connect all these dots, show us this bigger picture that we might be missing if we're just stuck in those traditional ways of looking at history.
Right, exactly.
And I think one of the best examples of that is how they talk about those shared symbols and motifs that you find in ancient cultures all over the world.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Straighton's argument is that these similarities, even though these cultures were so far apart, they suggest, maybe a common source of inspiration. And of course, they're saying that source could be those celestial visitors.
It all ties into the idea of cultural diffusion, right? How cultural beliefs and practices spread from one group to another. And while mainstream archaeology usually explains those similarities by pointing to things like migration or trade, normal cultural exchange, Straiton's proposing something much more radical. They're basically saying, what if some of these shared motifs actually came from aliens?
So instead of people spreading ideas through travel or trade, it's like these ancient astronauts were zipping around, dropping off knowledge and symbols, leaving their mark on human culture.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. I mean, it's a pretty wild idea, but even if we completely ignore the extraterrestrial angle, the fact that these similarities exist is pretty amazing in itself. It suggests some kind of deep connection between human societies, no matter how far apart they were or how long ago they existed.
It really does. It's like deep down, we're all connected somehow.
Right. And it shows us that it's so important to look at things from different angles, to consider both the conventional explanations and the unconventional ones when we're trying to figure out these historical mysteries.
Totally. It's easy to jump to conclusions, especially when you're dealing with mind-blowing stuff like this. But we got to stay balanced, look at all sides, and really be critical about the evidence.
Couldn't agree more. Keep that critical thinking cap on.
Okay, so as we finish up this deep dive into Valentia Straiton's Celestial Ship of the North, what are your final thoughts? What do you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
Well, I hope this has, maybe sparked some curiosity, some sense of wonder about our past. And whether or not people agree with Straiton, I think the document reminds us that history is messy. It's full of mysteries and different interpretations and discoveries that are still being made. It encourages us to question everything, to look at things from different perspectives, and to realize that we don't have all the answers.
So well said. I mean, that's what makes history so fascinating, right? That constant search for knowledge, trying to unravel those mysteries, and realizing that there's always more to learn.
Always.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring, to dive into the topics that really grab your attention, and never lose that sense of wonder, that curiosity that makes us want to understand our place in everything.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe someday we'll find that one piece of evidence, that missing link that explains it all. But until then, keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Valentia Straiton and the Celestial Ship of the North. We'll be back soon with another exciting exploration, so stay tuned.